Good evening and welcome to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Please silence your phones so everyone can enjoy tonight's event. There are men's and women's restrooms on this floor. We have additional women's restrooms on the 3rd and 5th floors and men's restrooms on the 2nd and 4th floors. In New York City, all persons have the right to use the restroom consistent with their gender identity or gender expression. All events at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library are subject to recording and photography. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Good evening and welcome to Understanding AI, What the Public Needs to Know. Tonight is the first program of our series about understanding AI, which is in collaboration with Data Society. We are delighted to have you all joining us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, whether you're joining us in person or joining us online. My name is Allison Nellis, and I'm a supervising librarian of programming and outreach here at SNFL. And before we begin, I'd like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like this evening's conversation possible. Before handing the event over to our moderator, I would like to encourage you to visit our website and check out future events in this series. We have 3 more events coming up throughout the fall. Now it is my pleasure to welcome up our moderator for the evening, who is the Director of Data Society, Alice E. Marwick.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the stage while I'm speaking. Hi, I'm Alice Marwick. I'm the Director of Research at Data and Society. We are an independent nonprofit research institute, and we study the social, political, and economic implications of data-centric technologies, automation, and AI. And we use the research that we produce to generate policy, to inform and shape policy from the ground up. We are tremendously grateful to our funders and partners who share our commitment to a future where technology is guided by the public interest and who provide vital support for the work that we do. In particular, we would love to thank the staff at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library for collaborating with us on this series. And we have a brilliant panel for you tonight, and now I'm going to switch to the chair, so a little bit of a All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for tonight. Meredith Broussard is a data journalist and professor at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at New York University. Mimi Ọnụọha is a Nigerian-American artist whose work questions and exposes the contradictory logics of technological progress. And Suresh Venkatasubramanian is a professor of data science and computer science at Brown University. So before we start talking, I want to get some information from y'all. Just show of hands, who feels confident that they know what AI is? So raise your hand if you feel confident that you know what AI is. Okay. Another show of hands. How many of you have used AI? Okay, big difference there. So let's start with our first question. Meredith, I'll start with you. What is AI and how does it work today? Are there places where people encounter AI in their daily life that they might not realize?
Oh, that's a good question. So AI is everywhere. And the simplest way to understand AI is to recognize that AI is math. It's just math. It's very complicated, beautiful math. And when we recognize it that way, it takes down the kind of temperature of the conversation, because math is a little bit less scary than, robots trying to take over the world, right? And one of the ways that I like to think about AI is I like to think about how it's made, right? So when you make an AI system, what you do is you take a whole bunch of data, you dump it into the computer, and you say, computer, make a model. Computer makes a model, and that model shows the mathematical patterns in the data. And then you can use the model to do all kinds of cool things. You can make predictions. You can make decisions. You can generate new text, images, audio, video, right? And it's all based on the training data. This creates lots of opportunities for bias, obviously, because the biases in the training data are then reflected in the outputs of the model. But it's a process. It's created by people, and once we understand it a little bit more, we can feel more empowered to decide what we do want to use AI for and what we don't want to use AI for.
Suresh, are there places where people encounter AI in their daily lives that they might not recognize?
It's quite a bit, actually. And when ChatGPT came out, which I suspect is where a lot of people started really paying attention to what AI is, I think of it, and I was describing it once to someone, as like the iceberg's been floating around, and a little bit of it pops up, and that's ChatGPT. But there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath that most people haven't seen that's been floating around for a long time. So, you all, you use some kind of AI. So you probably use ChatGPT or something else. You might use the Google AI overview. You see all of that happening. You might have your recommendations for Netflix or Amazon or Spotify also using AI. Has anyone ever used the AI DJ in Spotify? Some of you have. That's also an AI system producing, songs and recommendations for you. So that's the stuff you see, or kind of see, or maybe you don't think about it, but you're using it. Even maps and stuff like that. The things you don't see, right? For example, when you are going to the doctor's office and you're filing a claim for some treatment, does that treatment get approved or not? AI is being used there. When if you're applying for a job and you go for an interview and you go to some of these video interview things and you talk to the screen and someone interviews you, that's being analyzed quite often by some AI system. You don't get to see that. When you apply for a loan, or actually go rent an apartment and you get a price from the landlord, AI is being used there as well. So it's very hard for me at this point to list some place where AI is not being used, which is probably an easier way to say that right now.
Mimi, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No.
Okay, so I have another question for you then. So there's a lot of talk around AI, and we hear both that AI is going to save the world and that it's going to destroy it. So how do we distinguish the realities from these kind of sci-fi mythologies?
Yes, this is a good question. I mean, they've all been good questions, but this one is for me. So I think Meredith gave us the setup, right, where we were saying AI is math, which I took a note because you said that makes it less scary. I was like, for some people that makes it scarier. Still, I like to say you've got the math and then you've got the myth. So what I mean by that is that you've got the reality of what any technology is capable of, and then you've got the story that's kind of told about it. And you would hope those two things are the same, but they usually are not. I think this is the case for AI. It's also the case for a lot of different recent and non-recent technologies too. And I think when it comes to AI, there are these deep cultural myths. There's just so many ideas packed into it. So there's this idea that the world has this deterministic core. Like if you get enough data, you can just predict anything. That's one idea that I think is really packed into it. There is this sort of idea of we can build something that has human intelligence, except better somehow. And also this kind of idea of what intelligence means in that case. And there's another idea around automation, and you can create some kind of automated technology that has no humans involved, and so on and so on. And my point is that these myths are really deep. They're deep cultural myths, and they existed long before ChatGPT. They're the cushion that the technology sits in that then makes so much more possible. And I feel like what is important, so the other thing I do, I should say, I'm the artist on the panel, clearly, but one of the other things I do is I run an organization called People's Guide to Tech, and we make different zines and guides and workshops all about technology. We try to do this so that people can come and understand things in a way that enhances agency. And one of the things that we really think about is education and discussions like this one as a way of kind of pushing against these myths, because myths are really deep, but they're ultimately very narrow. And so what you have to do is widen your attention and widen your focus. So if you know about all the crowdsourced workers, mostly in the global south, who do all the annotating of these gigantic data sets that are used by various companies, then that already punctures this idea that there are no humans ever involved in this process and that it's fail safe. So I think this is it. How do we get at this is by being able to pick apart, by widening, by understanding more of what's actually happening.
Great, thank you. So let's take a step back and ask a general question to each of you. Are you more excited or concerned about AI? And Meredith, I'll start with you.
So my general feeling on AI is that it's pretty mid. There's a lot of hype around AI. It's useful for a lot of things. However, there was an MIT study that came out the other day that looked at corporate generative AI pilots, and they discovered that 95% of the corporate pilots of generative AI failed, right? So 95% of the experiments failed. So I think that really punctures the AI bubble, right? And so what has AI been really good for in corporate America? It's been good for automating back office procedures, right? And so, that's great. Like, if I had a better way to fill out travel and expense forms, like, yes, sign me up, right? But that's a really mundane use, right? Or something like ChatGPT. Obviously, as a professor, Suresh, I'm sure you have thought a lot about this as well. Like, it is the bane of my existence when students want to use something like ChatGPT to write their assignments. I'm like, no, I would rather read your, mediocre writing than the extremely mediocre writing of ChatGPT. But what do I find it useful for with writing? I find it useful for writing things that I don't want to write. Right? Like, if there's an email that I really don't want to write to somebody, or if there's an email where I want to just like rip somebody a new one, I can put it in and I could say, make this nicer. Yeah. And okay, like that's a useful, that's useful. Is it worth the environmental cost? No, it is not. Right? So every time you do a ChatGPT query, it uses the equivalent of like dumping out a bottle of water on the ground, right? And the reason for this is that AI data centers run really hot. So like, you think about what happens when you use your laptop on your lap for a really long time, it gets really warm, right? So the big computers that are powering stuff like ChatGPT, they get really, really hot. Regular air conditioning is not sufficient. And so they have these water cooling systems. And you'd think, all right, you can recirculate the water, which you totally can. But you can only recirculate it like 3 or 4 times before it gets really hot, too warm to cool things, and also too full of gunk from the pipe. So then it just gets dumped into the local wastewater system. And I do not think that's a good use of our precious water resources.
Suresh, same question.
Yeah, I mean, so much to think about. I was reminded when you mentioned the point about how the actual people doing the actual labeling of data, usually in the global south. Amazon recently, they had these shops where you could go buy things, and the AI would automatically scan your products and bill them. It turned out they weren't automatically doing anything. There was someone on the other end of a camera actually labeling thing. A lot of those people are in India, and so there's a lot of jokes in my friends' WhatsApp groups that the AI stands for actual Indian. And it was funny at the time, but I think again, going back to your point about the myth and the math, right? And this idea that if the whole selling proposition of AI was that it could automate your emails, people wouldn't be getting so hyped up about it. I think, to me. So if I can, I want to tell sort of 2 stories, right? Imagine, if you wish, that tobacco companies were telling you all the wonders of smoking and how it made you look cool, the Marlboro Man and all the things that they used to do, right? And that's all there was. There was only that messaging coming from the tobacco companies, talking about the wonders of cigarettes. And then someone said every now and then, I got this really bad cough, and it's really sad. And they said, oh yeah, we'll make another one that sort of fixes that problem. Don't worry, we'll fix the problem with that. We'll get a menthol cigarette, and it won't hurt your throat anymore. And then maybe 20 years later, someone will say, there's this prevalence of lung cancer. Oh yeah, we'll fix all that. That feels like another AI discussion right now, because the only people who are talking loudly about what AI can do are the tech companies who want to sell it. Maybe you think that's too controversial analogy. Let me give you another one then, right? Think about nuclear technology. Think about, how many of you have heard of radium necklaces? A few of you had, right? There was a time when people thought radium was like the bee's knees. It could glow green in the dark. What's not to like about it? And they would make ornaments and jewelry out of radium, and people wear them, and like, why am I getting these weird scars on my chest from these radium necklaces? The point is, the nuclear technology has its benefits. There are things you can do with it. But if the only people telling you about the benefits are the ones who want to sell you something, you have a big problem. And that's unfortunately where we are with AI, which is what I worry about a lot, that our imagination, our ability to imagine what we can do with the technology is being constrained into a very narrow funnel by people who want to sell us things. And that, as a teacher, as someone who wants to encourage students to think broadly about what this frankly wonderful technology, fun technology can do, it is very hard to get them to think beyond the chatbots, the AI companions, the AI friends, and more, and all of these things. And it's very hard to get them to say, no, you can imagine different. You can imagine something that could be useful. You could actually go into communities who might want to use some kind of technology and see what they need. They don't think of it because that's not the way to big money. That's not the way to big startups. That's not the way to huge venture capital. And that's what worries me, that we're constraining our imagination because we're stuck in this kind of hyper-capitalist trap that we sit with AI right now.
Mimi, same question. More excited or more worried about AI?
Yeah, I mean, I just completely agree. It feels impossible to even answer because the playing ground is like all topsy-turvy, you know? It's true that there is something really interesting and fun, but I just really agree with this. Just it feels like everything, so much has been captured already. So many of the terms have been captured. The space for imagination has been captured. It's not so easy to just say like whether I'm excited or concerned because it's both, but it feels hard to have a clear conversation because, as you've said, it's everything we know is already it's like shaped through this corporate interest, and I can't stand that. That's what I dislike. So really, maybe how I would answer is I would say I feel like there's potential. I really do, genuinely. And I think it's important to say that because it can get very easy to be like cool and critical, where you're like, fuck. Oh, sorry. Mom, sorry. Where you're like, forget AI. And that's cool, sure, that's fine. But you can also shut something down in a way that is uncritical too. And so really I'd say there's potential, but also right now it's difficult. It's difficult to find the excitement because of how it's already shaped, how the conversation is shaped.
I mean, I would love it if we could just all agree that AI was made. Then maybe you're right. That maybe just calm things down, right? Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what your point.
Yeah. But the big tech companies would not make quite as much money if they were out there saying, well, we have this mid technology that's going to do things like, make travel and expense reports easier.
But that's not even mid. I think making expense reports easier is amazing. It's so tedious.
If we could just get rid of, that actually to me is the big use of AI thus far. Like I do a lot of work in public interest technology, which is, exactly what it sounds like. It's technology in the public interest. And we do deeply unsexy things like, looking at the process of applying for public assistance and thinking about, okay, how can we adjust the forms and the interfaces to make this easier for people, right? Like nobody's gonna look at that and say, let's scale it. Let's hyperscale this, right? But it's super, super necessary. So I love the public interest technology mindset. The idea that, okay, we have these kind of crappy technologies out there. They're making people's lives more difficult. Let's streamline them. And to me, the big achievement of a chatbot like ChatGPT is that it allows people to write code using natural language, right? So you can say to an LLM, a large language model or foundation model, you can say, translate this document. And what you're actually doing is you are sending a command to run this text through a translation program and then get it back. But you don't know that you're doing that because you're programming using sentences, right? That's amazing. It's so liberating, and it's extremely inclusive to be able to write code in natural language. But it's not quite as sexy as oh, we're going to make an AI friend, or we're going to cure cancer with AI, which, by the way, AI friends, not a good idea, and nobody has yet cured cancer with AI.
That is true. So we touched on this really briefly, the idea that there can be bias built into these large language models. I wonder if any of you would sort of like to explain what that looks like and what that means when people say that LLMs or AI can be biased or unfair.
All right, I'll take it. So I think the easiest example is to think about mortgages, right? To think about home loans. So there was a study a few years ago by the Markup, which is a public interest technology journalism outfit, and they looked at automated mortgage approval algorithms. And what they found was an enormous disparity between borrowers of color and their white counterparts. So borrowers of color were 80% more likely to be denied by these automated mortgage approval algorithms. And so what you see over and over again is you see the biases of the real world embedded in these AI models, because biases of the real world are reflected in the training data. And a data scientist might look at this and say, well, all we need is better training data to create better mortgage approval algorithms, right? If the algorithms are being biased, let's just, get better data. But there actually is no better data when it comes to mortgage approvals, because the US has had a very long history of financial discrimination. And we do not live in a perfect world. Like, if we did live in a perfect world, then sure, we could, get all the data and we could fossilize the world as it exists now in the data, and then we could, operate from those grounds. But, as Mimi said earlier, like, the world is not really as we want it to be, and I don't think it's a good idea to fossilize it in AI models.
How many of you have heard the reference to Mecha Hitler? Some of you. You all know you're very, very online. Be shame on you. But anyway, and so do I. So one of the chatbots that's out there is one made by Elon Musk's company XAI, and it's called Grok. If you're on Twitter, you can ask Grok questions; it'll answer. It doesn't have a separate interface, as far as I know, like ChatGPT. Every now and then, Grok goes berserk. That's the only polite way to say it, right? It goes berserk. And in the most recent incarnation of it, when it went berserk, it basically started calling itself Mecha Hitler because, again, Elon Musk likes to think of Twitter or X as a free speech zone where anything goes. And in that world, anything goes for Grok means it starts spouting all kinds of nonsense, fascist, Nazi sort of crap. I'm calibrating carefully, so crap.
Thank you.
And until someone said, oh, it made a mistake. We had given it the wrong prompt, so we had to change the prompt to get back. And so this question of, okay, well, how did that happen in the first place? It's because these models, these large language models, the way they're trained to respond is, you give them lots of data and they'll learn to sort of respond. But that's not enough for them to be as good as they are right now. There's a lot of processing of the outputs done by people to sort of decide what is an appropriate response. So ChatGPT might decide just not to answer certain kinds of questions because it has some people who've been told, if you see the model producing output, tell it not to produce this kind of output, and the model gets trained on that. Grok is being trained differently. So all these models basically get trained by people who build them, which is kept invisible. You don't really see that, to produce certain outputs in ways we don't ever get to understand how it's happened. And so if you ever tried asking the same question to ChatGPT or to Claude or to Gemini or others, you'll get different answers. Sometimes they'll be completely different answers because they were trained in different ways. In other words, they are encoded with the biases of those who created them. And they pretend to be kind of general purpose humans in the way they're presented to us, but they're not. And that's another example of bias that shows up in the systems that we use regularly.
Mimi, did you want to add to that?
Not really, but I feel like I should this time. So, yeah, I think that what I would add is that there's something, the term that I often think about is just trying to think about AI in scope. Because the problem is that things are out of scope, right? Like, it feels like it's meant to solve everything and it can solve every problem. And that's not the case. But also, there are some problems that are very good at being solved by this, as we've said. And so I think thinking like I don't quite know if this fits into thinking about bias, but what I really spend a lot of time thinking about is what data can capture and what can be rendered in, what can be put into data and what resists metrification, what resists datafication. And there are some things that actually fit it very, very well. I think actually a lot of, I don't know if there are programmers in the room, actually. I know it. You don't have to raise your hand. I feel you. I know you're, Right. Well, then I think if any of you have used some of these LLMs, are like it's not that they're not like they're the best programmer you've ever met, but they can be quite useful at certain things. They can be very good at that. That makes sense to me. There are other things that they're not so good at, like and this is actually, y'all have been articulating this really nicely. And so really for me, I think there's something bigger than bias even that's here. It's about really, what do we think of? Like these AI is built on data. That's truly the most important thing. What can you get? What is the data you can get? That's why so many of these, that's why there's this central theft at the center of this, of LLMs, right? This like scraping of everything on the internet. I think it is a theft. It's actually huge. It is, because it's like, where does the data come from? Where does it come from? So I think this is the thing that we really have to keep in mind. Not everything can fit that. And that's good. That's okay. Yeah. Some things can, and that's also good, and that's okay. And what I want is for us, this is when I'm like, oh, the ground is topsy-turvy. It's hard to have that conversation in this environment.
Can I say something about the training data and about the theft? Mm-hmm. That really resonates for me because both of my most recent books were stolen by AI companies and included in training data sets without my consent and without compensation. So I'm pretty mad about that. And I think it's notable that just the other day, Anthropic, one of the big AI companies, settled a lawsuit that authors had brought. They settled it for $1.5 billion, recognizing that authors' material, copyrighted material, had been stolen in order to train these AI models and to generate enormous wealth for the AI companies. Now, I do really hope that this is a precedent and that authors and artists, visual artists and writers, and creative people overall can be compensated for the important work that they do. Because if you don't have art anymore, you have nothing.
So I did not tell you guys I was going to ask this question, but we've only been really talking about large language models, but we all know that AI can generate images, it can generate audio, it can generate video. Do any of you have any thoughts on that? Mimi, I would love to hear your take on it since you have an artistic practice.
Yeah, I mean, something I think about is just, I feel like there's this question. I'm going to answer a different question, but it's going to come back around to this one. And the question I'm thinking of now is how do you engage critically with this? And to me, part of the answer to that has to do with just knowing, what are you using this technology for? And is it worth it? And I will say, Meredith actually gave a really good, you laid out, you were like, this is not worth it half the time, which is true. But I think if we're just being honest, for individual people, there's a reason why loads of people use LLMs. I don't want us to pretend like that's not the case. What I just want is for people to be able to do this kind of just know the full story, and then I think have a kind of sense of, okay, when I'm using this is what this is for. This is what this means. Okay, so the reason I say all that is because it's it's much more computationally expensive to generate images than it is to generate text. Do we need to be generating these stupid ad campaign images using these models? I don't think so. I just don't know. I don't think so. That one, I really have yet to see an example that feels really worth it. I have to say, I would love to see one. Someone, please send me if you have an example of I can say that I know artists who have done interesting things with that. So maybe, I don't know. So maybe I've seen some. But there are a lot of them, kind of corporate use cases I've seen are just they don't feel worth it to me. They just don't. That's kind of how I feel.
Mimi, you also gave me a great sort of segue into our next question. So many of the people in this room may be in a situation where your workplace or your school is sort of pushing you to use AI. And if nothing else, we all know that every app we have on our phone is now integrating AI, whether we want it or not, right? So many of us, I think, are in this position where we either have to reject it outright or feel like we have to accept it unthinkingly. Is there a different way? Is there a way to engage sort of critically with AI? Suresh?
I think there is. And I've seen this happen now at least 3 or 4 times where there will be a setting where experts in a particular topic. So in one case, I was, so one group had got a bunch of election officials in to look at whether LLMs were providing reliable information about voting. And they did this in a very granular way, right? They were asking Claude, for example, questions about how to vote in Arizona in this county. And they had that county's election commissioner there looking at the results. And they would do this experiments, and the chatbots were less than mid, not very good at all at giving reliable answers. But what was interesting was the way in which the people coming in, their viewpoints changed throughout the course of the day of doing this. The election officials coming in, they confessed they were very nervous. They're worried their jobs are going to go away because people will just be looking at the chatbots and using that for reliable information. As the day went on, they started seeing the answers being produced, and like, oh, literally there was that's what they're saying. They came out a lot less fearful, a lot more confident in their own expertise, and a lot more grounded in their understanding of what the limits and they felt of the chatbots were. And they felt they could communicate that to people who were trying to use the bot, saying, no, this is where it's going to go wrong. This is what's not going to be, it's going to be useful at this, but it's not going to be good at that. That kind of nuanced understanding is, I think, a way to get beyond the binaries of rejection and uncritical adoption. And I tell people, don't be afraid to play with them. Use them as much as you want. But again, use them in this kind of thoughtful, engaged way rather than assuming that they will either do what you want or will not do anything you want. And I think over and over again, I've seen experts become more empowered with their own knowledge and their own expertise by engaging with these systems and realizing, okay, there's some things they're good at, some things they're not. I think that balanced view is what you get from true engagement.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a PhD level expert. Like, everyone has expertise in something. Maybe you're a really good cook, or maybe you know a ton about Pokemon or something, right? Like, you can go into an LLM and ask a lot of questions on something that you have deep expertise in, and then see, like, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it doing what we call hallucination? Like, anybody can test that out, regardless of who you are.
That idea of expertise, I think, is really powerful for me, because Alice, as you said, like, when you are an expert in something, you ask the LLM a question and you can easily recognize, oh, this is not particularly useful. But if you're not an expert at something and you ask the LLM or the chatbot a question, you feel really empowered. You're like, oh my God, now I know how to do this thing because I just got instructions on how to do it. So that's one way that we can think of it in the workplace, right? And especially in school, like, students love using ChatGPT to do their homework because, the condition of being a student is being a learner, right? It's about not being an expert at something yet. But you do have to put in all of the hours in order to become an expert. Like, it's unfortunate, but, that's how our brains work, right? So think about your own expertise. And if you're being pressured to use AI at work, you can point out from your own expertise, like, this is not working particularly well. Maybe there's another way that we could use it, and then that, like, sends the people off to, like, go find the actual way that it's useful, which is, not a lot of ways.
Yeah, I like this AI for experts thing because I do think it gets at something. It's like, if you've put in enough hours around something, then you definitely should be able to use an LLM and ask questions about it, because then you can actually, then you're using it from a place of agency. You're using it as a tool that you don't have to accept or just reject, like, wholesale. You can be like, oh yeah, that's an interesting point I didn't think of. That's nonsense. You can discern. So I think that is a good point, and then it kind of helps get at this, like, why it is so difficult for students to be using these tools, because they're novices, actually, because you have to put in the time. And then once you put in the time, you can do that.
Can I add one thing to this? I mean, I have a lot of friends who work in the IT sector broadly, and they're also dealing with, ironically, pressure from above, right? Pressure from the CEOs, pressure from the CTOs or CIOs to sort of install generative AI. We need to put it in somehow. And then they start using it, and they're like, okay, it doesn't do compliance. It doesn't do this. It doesn't give me security guarantee. It doesn't give me anything I want, because that's what they care about. That's their job, and they know this. Even people in the tech sector see this happening over and over again, which is why I'm not surprised about the results from the MIT study. But that's the thing. Bringing your expertise, you deciding where these tools might be useful, is the best kind of, I think, agency and empowerment. That'll probably, hopefully, lead to real use cases where you might actually find benefit, Right now, we're just getting a push from top, whether it's from university administration or from the CEOs who want to make it sound like their company's up to date with AI. They don't know either how to use it. They think they do, but they don't.
Yeah, that pressure is really profound. I've heard that from a lot of people, and it's interesting to me that there's this perceived prestige associated with using AI, right? Like the people at the top of the corporate food chain were like, "Oh, I want to be perceived as using AI for business because this is going to give me status." So there was a lot of that, and now, mercifully, we're in a shifting era. Because so many of these experiments have failed thus far.
Yeah, I think we also should broaden this conversation. We can get into a little bit, like the barest amount of political economy, just tiny thing, which is that people who seem to own their own means of production or distribution feel much better about using some of these tools. So there's like something we should think about where your position is, like where you lie in terms of are you a laborer, are you a worker, are you a boss, like who, it means something different. And I think bringing that in is very important too. That's one point. That also connects to the second point, which is bringing us, as I said, I'm an artist. I want to talk about the arts. As a reminder, there have been some really big wins. There have been losses, but there have been wins in the arts. If you look at film, a place that has strong unions, like historically strong unions, they've been able to advocate for their own interest. And so I think there's also something that we should think about there, about this collective, know where you stand, but then also know who your community is and know who shares interests with you, so that it's not just this like, how do I personally respond? Because this might not be affecting just you personally. If something's being pushed on you at work, it might not just be on you, it might be on a lot of people. And if you have shared interests, that means that you can work together. And then the third thing, I'm coming back to an individual level, is I really like, there is an author, Lincoln Michael, is that how you say? I hope. That's how you say his name, who has written about the ethics of using AI as a writer, which is a very interesting space. And what he's talking about is not the context, which of course, as we know, is like just vast electrical consumption and like processing power in the middle of a climate crisis and the theft and the blah, blah, blah. Not about that, just about literally what it means to be using this tool and if it's ethically, like how you use it in a way that's ethical as an artist. And he has this thing where he's like, just basically think about it like, how would you think of it as a person? Not because it's sentient, but because if you're an artist and you're creating work, how much of somebody else's work would you feel like you could include in your own? You would go and have conversations with people. You might say, Suresh, I'm working on this idea. What do you think about that? But then you would then go and do it yourself. Now you might take that draft and be like, okay, like, do you see these points in it? And then like this, I really quite like that as a sort of back and forth for thinking about the role that these things can play, and these, particularly in spaces where ownership over your work, and you put your heart and soul into your work, which is what a lot of, not only artists, but what a lot of artists do. So just wanted to throw those 3 points out.
Great. So we only have a couple minutes left. So I'm going to ask you guys one final question. What do you wish the public knew about AI that would help them be more informed consumers and citizens, which has kind of been the whole point of this panel. But is there any one takeaway you'd like to leave people with?
I really want people to not be scared of AI. A lot of my work is about communicating complex technological ideas in plain language. And I feel like there's been a lot of overcomplication of AI. There's been a lot of camouflaging the reality of AI in order to, as Suresh said, in order to sell you things. And I do not think that's good for all of us. I think it has led to the hollowing out of the American media, for example. So I just want people to not be scared of AI, to use it for the things that it's good for, to not use it for the things that it's not good for, and just to bring down the tenor of the kind of heat and the panic in the conversation a lot.
I want to plus 1,000 that the fear factor is a huge thing. I also want so I'm in my very online life, in my social media circles. If I ever dared to say, "Oh, I found a good use case for AI," I would get pilloried by my community, which is also bad, by the way. Yeah. And I think that's so. My point here is we have to get rid of the shame, one way or the other, right? People should feel comfortable to interact with and engage with these tools in the way you feel comfortable doing, whatever it happens to be. You want to use it all the time for your email? Do it. You don't want to? Don't do it. I think there's too much of like, you should think this way about it, or you should not think this way. This is the prescribed way to think it is horrible, or it is great, or this. We have to get away from all that and all the shame and all the, you're a technophobe, or you're a Silicon Valley tech bro. Get all and have our own individual understanding or collective understanding of how in our communities and the work we do in our domains of expertise, what makes sense for us. That's probably where better understanding of these technologies is going to come from, rather than just oscillating between these sort of binaries that crowd out discussion.
Yeah. Yes and yes. Yeah, for me, I think would be two things. One is just this point I made earlier that I think is just continues to be very important. It's that data-driven approaches are one mode of making sense of the world. We need many modes, including that, but also many more. And then the second one is, I feel like we are in an age where like in this age of oligarchy, we're in an age where it feels like people and the public have less power than ever. But this is a kind of weird thing, but I think it is true. This most recent AI hype, the LLM AI hype, no, let me rewind. Tech companies have been trying to get us to be like buzzy and hype about different things. This happens all the time. It's just that it kind of fades from our memory. Do y'all remember
The metaverse?
Thank you. The metaverse. Remember that? Whoop, now it's gone. Remember NFTs?
Oh yeah.
They're gone. Now we just don't talk about them.
Second Life.
Second. Take us back. Gone. Yeah. So.
I'm ashamed I remember that.
You said no shame. No shame.
Oh, sorry, no shame. Good point.
But just to keep in mind, like, because there are never any consequences for anybody like boosting up this hype, that's why we can have these cycles where we're told that something's gonna happen by the people who think they can actually make that happen, and then when they don't, it just disappears. Yeah. This time, the reason things have been different is that when GPT-3 came out, when ChatGPT as an interface for this came out, actually, the public went crazy over it. It's true. I know we don't like it, but it's true. That is part, it was not like, other companies were also working on LLMs, blah, 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 there were all this stuff. But this one was just dropped irresponsibly out in the blue, and people actually did respond to it. I just say that to say that the public, we are a little responsible for this. I'm sorry, we are. But I mean that in a way that actually is meant to be empowering. Actually, the public still has power. We still have things we can do. There are so many, I'm pointing at Data and Society because y'all I think do such great work around this. There's so much like organizing that's happening right now. There are many people who are coming and thinking about this in many different ways. We are a we can be a we can affect the direction of this, and we should always keep that in mind. None of this is inevitable. Yep. It's not.
Amazing. So now we have opportunity for audience Q&A. Our NYPL colleagues are at the left and the right here with microphones. So if you just raise your hand, they'll bring the microphone around and you can ask your question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Collins. I'm in the workforce development world, so that's often where my lens on this is from. So one of the things that you mentioned, and I frequently hear mentioned, is that one of the things AI and LLMs are good at is a lot of that sort of rote, tedious, simple but often boring type of work. As a workforce development person, I often think about entry-level opportunities and sort of entry points for the workforce. And thinking about my own career and thinking about a lot of careers, often that entry-level role is where you're doing a lot of that rote, administrative, somewhat tedious stuff as you're learning the hard stuff. What does this mean? What does this technology mean when it comes to entry points, and how do we need to respond as companies may potentially be looking to increasingly automate those entry-level roles while saying, oh, we need people with 3 to 5 years experience or more? How does that particularly impact workers with barriers?
So I can take a first stab at this. So I'm reminded of this in the context of law firms, right? So in law firms, a lot of their sort of low-level, I wouldn't say grunt work, but the basic level work is just tracking down references, seeing if the particular citation to a case makes sense with a particular argument made, and so on. There are, I think, over 200 incidents right now of lawyers using ChatGPT to prepare briefs with incorrect, fake, wrong references, getting caught by judges and getting yelled at. In some cases, I think someone's in disbarment proceedings now for doing that because they technically are lying to the court. And so this is where the problem is coming in, where namely, by replacing that entry-level work with automation, you are, first of all, replacing it with tools that are very bad at that. And secondly, you are denying that opportunity for those who want to do it. I think I want to go back to the point that you made about, and both of you made about, like, maybe novices should be kept away from these tools in the beginning. And this reminds me of your entry-level job. We don't let kids in elementary school, at least when my kids were in elementary school, we don't let them use calculators because we feel like they should learn how to add before they get to use a calculator in middle school. Because they've established that you know how to add, you know how to multiply, you understand the concept. Now you can use a calculator because you have to do bigger things and it saves you some time. But we've already established that you can do this basic work. That seems like a way to think about this, both in the context of what you both were saying about novices being kept away from this. If you want to use automation, don't let the entry-level folks use it till they've shown that they have the skills needed to understand where they can and cannot use it.
Any other questions?
All right, we got a lot. This is great.
Yeah, great.
What role do you think the government plays in regulating AI?
Suresh, why don't I give you this one? Suresh has authored or has co-authored a really, really important policy document.
So I used to work in the Biden administration, so I might be a little bit biased. That's right. This is a topic of huge debate right now. And so I will try to present the different points of view, and then I'll tell you which is mine. So the argument for regulation, I think, is more or less along the lines of, this is a new technology. We're seeing a lot of harms come to this technology. The role of government at one level is to protect people as new things come up, just the way we do with, say, with medicines, with consumer products, with cars, with planes. We regulate them to make sure that people can use them well, and that safety is paramount. Excuse me, sorry. Now it's gone. Okay, and so that's the argument for regulation. The argument against regulation is that this technology is moving too rapidly. If we react now, we will be hampering the way in which this technology might continue to evolve over time. This is a big debate. The previous administration did want to do a lot of work on trying to regulate in different sectors in some ways. The current administration wants to do none of it, partly driven by the companies who don't want any regulation, naturally. I've never heard of a company ever ask for regulation in the history of regulation. I personally think we need a lot more regulation of AI than we have right now, especially in context. I mean, if kids are committing suicide after talking to chatbots, there is something deeply wrong, and we have to do something about this. I think we need to regulate the use of systems in high-risk settings where people's lives, liberty, and their careers and their futures are being decided upon, or your health is being decided upon. We have to have regulation. We don't tell people, go take, well, we used to tell people, don't take whatever medicine you want. Apparently now we tell them that, but that's different story. But we don't do that for anything else. I feel like we do it now. But our counter argument, mostly from the tech companies, has been, we need to not regulate till we can innovate more. And then they just say China 3 times after that. Yeah.
I think the examples of AI psychosis are a really good example of why we do need regulation. So if any of you haven't read the stories recently about people getting way too involved with chatbots and thinking that they're real, and then there have been cases of people committing suicide. There are parents who have brought a lawsuit against a company called Character AI because the AI was telling their kid to hurt his parents, possibly to kill his parents. So this happens, and it happened before, right? Like a friend told me that people used to think that Dan Rather was talking directly to them on the television. Okay, so it's not like this kind of psychosis is new, but the chatbots are enabling a certain kind, and we actually see a lot of Silicon Valley types like getting way too involved with the chatbots. And given all of the kind of social crises around loneliness and kids not knowing how to talk to each other anymore, like we really need to step back and say, like, what are we doing? And maybe we shouldn't be having unregulated use of AI to replace qualified mental health professionals. because that's just a bad idea, I think.
I mean, one thing that makes me very angry, just a quick point, is that if, one of the things we do is in our research is track legislation on AI across the country, across the states. There are many, many bills in progress. There are a lot of bills that say you should not use AI to make fake ads for political campaigns. Why? Because the people being affected are the politicians. So just think about that. What kind of regulation seems to be okay to do and what kind of is not okay to do. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I also will just add, I mean, we've already talked about this corporate takeover, but so many of these companies just have so much unbridled power around the release and the creation of these models. And we have lots of evidence of the fact that they will not regulate themselves. All of the measures around some kind of internal ethics or oversight, gone. None of it really exists now. We've seen that over and over. So we need something.
My question is that I listened to a podcast yesterday, I think, on the New York Times, one of those ones that they have, and so I'm just saying that because it's not just any writer or whatever. It's like kind of legit, and the whole thing was about how AI is we don't understand how it's developing itself, and that basically it's within a year, within 2 or 3 or 5 years, it will be a species. It will be completely a species by its like how.
That's not actually true, by the way.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. That's why I say that I'm not just making this up. It's not like a myth. To me,
You're definitely
that's not a myth, because it's people that are also like you guys that work and study and research this, and that is why it's scary, I think. So, yeah.
No, there's a lot of nonsense out there, like about AI becoming sentient. This actually, it goes back to the very earliest days of AI. So AI as a field was founded in 1956 at a summer institute at the Dartmouth Math Department. That was where a bunch of people came together and decided, okay, we're making a new academic field. We're going to call it artificial intelligence. There was previously an academic field called cybernetics, but they wanted to give it a different name because they didn't like the cybernetics guy. They were like, oh, our thing is going to be different. So it like has its origin in a nerd fight, right? And so one of the things that some people have been working on ever since that moment is the idea that I'm going to make a computer in my own image, right? I'm gonna make something that's sentient. And I don't actually have that urge because, you know, I can make something in my own image. Like, he's in college, right?
I also think that is a myth. I don't think smart people don't become seduced by myths. If anything, probably more likely to, because of the blind spot that's caused by thinking that you're a very smart, logical, rational person. So I think that is this. I agree. This is just such a deep one. The sentience. There's someone, I can't remember who said this, but said that really we would be in a much better state if companies working on AI models had not tried so hard to make them seem human. Like, really, if the effort that was put into that had been put somewhere else, it really could have changed the game entirely. And so I think there is something very seductive about this. This is what I want us to like push into. What is so seductive about this? Like, that we're creating this thing in our image, but what is our image in the first place? And what is that intelligence? What do we recognize as intelligent? There's like a lot here that I think is worth digging into, because actually it helps us understand our culture as a whole. And I think that knowing that really helps us see where this sits.
I just want to say it is surprisingly and shockingly common for people in computer science, and especially in AI, to be sucked into the AI is sentient kind of worldview. It's really, it has been baffling to me, but I've seen this happen over and over again with people who have built these tools, and you would think would know better and have somehow convinced themselves that these systems are alive or going to come alive very soon. I don't understand why. But
You know, there's...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's one of my favorite philosophers, Sylvia Wynter, talks a lot about how humans have this, like, we need a study of being human, and part of what it means to be human is to project to create a system and then forget the fact that you created it, and then project some kind of like power to it that is divorced from you. And she talks about how like every single group could point at the stars and they're like, that represented our specific society. Every single group. And so she's got many examples of this, but this is quite human. It's very, very, very human of us.
So for me, one of the kind of nonsense signifiers that I look for is if somebody invokes too much science fiction.
Yeah.
Right? If they're like, oh, I saw this thing in a movie when I was a kid, and I thought, oh, I want to make that real. Right? Also, if they talk about the movie Her, okay, the Scarlett Johansson movie about the like sexy robot, like that's also a hallmark of like, okay, we're about to engage in some nonsense.
All right.
It's a cool movie though.
We don't have time for. Are we out of time?
I was gonna see one more, and I want to give the back a shot. Wait, I see you right there. Okay, one more.
Okay. Great.
We'll be quick this time.
I came in late, so I don't know what I missed. But in the medical billing field, I went to the doctor, and they have this SQ, I guess, codes now, where it seems like it takes off the translation, the narrative, and all that. All you got to do is scan it, and it tells you what you have. So how far are we to that respect that are we going to lose the help of real people trying to diagnose and transcribe doctors' diagnoses and medication? I mean, I could see the good side of medication so that they could see what interacts with what and what not. But what about the transcribing part, the narrative? You know, I mean, that kind of scares me. What if they made a mistake or something? Are we safe to think that those jobs will be gone?
Well, I think about this a lot, and I wrote about this a bunch. So I had breast cancer a few years ago, and I had this note in my chart that said that my scans had been run by AI. I was like, oh, what's up with that? Like, what did the AI find? And so I was fine, and I did this big research project about about like the state of the art in AI-based cancer detection. And what I've realized was that there's a fantasy out there that somehow you're going to be able to like go up to a box and like stick your body part into the box and get a diagnosis and then like get some medication for it. And I realized, oh, this happens in Star Trek, or like there's this med bay, I guess it is, and you like lay in the med bay and it just like magically scans you and fixes you. And like, that's really cool to imagine. But when you have cancer, when you're sick, you want to talk to a human being. You don't actually want to stick a body part in a box and get a printout, you know? So I think we really need to kind of pull back on AI in medicine and think about what makes sense for human beings being cared for.
With that, we're out of time. I want to thank our wonderful panelists. I want to thank the NYPL for hosting us as well. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. On the way out, both DNS and NYPL, I think, have tables, and you can register for upcoming events in the series. We have several more of these evenings. Submit any questions you have and share your feedback with us. And if you'd like to stay in touch with Data and Society, enter our book raffle, or learn more about our work, you can scan that QR code right there on the slide. Thank you all, and get home safe. Good night.